Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the DVTests podcast. Name still pending. If I think of something better, I'll change it. Who knows? But anyway, today I have special guest Phil from Open Flywheel Project, or as many lovingly refer to him on the internet, OPF.
Hey, it's OFP.
Anyway,
I know people get that wrong, and it's funny, but
anyway, so we're gonna talk about some cool flywheel tech that's coming out right now. Talk about Phil's career through Nerf and some other stuff. So, Phil, you want to start with just telling us who you are, how you got into Nerf, and what Open Flywheel Project is.
yeah, sure. So I'm Philip Sweeting. I'm a first year out of college, so first year post college. I'm living in Brooklyn, New York City right now. I studied mechanical engineering, and I've always loved Nerf. When I was a kid, it was my favorite thing. I didn't have any because my parents were super anti-gun until my friend got me a Nerf blaster, and I told my dad I should be allowed to have Nerf blasters because I'll mod them and I'll become an engineer one day and it'll be awesome. He relented. But then in college, in high school, I stopped following the hobby that much. I built a bunch of PVC homemades and NIC stuff back in the old days. And then in college, I discovered HVZ my pretty much junior year. Got back into it and rapidly really fell in love with flywheel tech and how the simplicity mechanically of it. And around January last year, January 2017, I figured, this kind of sucks that there's no good flywheel cages available for free that I could print with my printer. So I drew one up with the intention of using just stock wheels on it and trying to get as much performance as possible for free before I realized that there were other benefits to increasing crush like that if you went with good wheels as well. And, from the beginning, it was always about reducing costs for me because I didn't want to spend money for the artifact red. So I thought releasing it open source would be a great way to reduce costs for everyone else. Really, I did not anticipate ever trying to make money off this. It was wow, I'll draw this over winter break and that'll be cool. I'll put it online and 10 people will download it. And I'll help some people. But it grew a lot more than I expected. And so we were able to add, at the time, my friend from school, Zach Spina, was helping me with this stuff. And we were able to get a lot of blasters prototyped and got out into the world pretty quickly, and from there it kind of grew. We had people approach us wanting to do deals and stuff and start selling our stuff. Adrian Kelly of Kelly Industries started saying, "Hey, Philip, can I sell your stuff?" And he started his business, and now look where he is. So I'm pretty proud of what I've done so far with it.
Yeah, so just for anyone who doesn't realize, because I don't think you said this, but Open Flywheel Project only started in January of this year, 2017. It has existed for 9 months now, basically, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you,
and I think I should have backed up. I'm not sure I made it clear. I design these are flywheel cages for basically all the common blasters, which compress the dart. Well, they have a lot of different features we can go over, but the main innovation on them was that they compress the dart more and squeeze it and get more velocity than a lot of other stuff that was available at the time.
Yeah. So for all of you who know Open Flywheel Project, and it's kind of this really obvious existence right now, everyone knows Open Flywheel Project is the go-to for the highest performance you get out of your flywheel right now, but it's only existed for 9 months now. which is pretty crazy. How quickly like all of these new things develop in the aftermarket scene. Um, but one of the things, I guess, at the beginning of Open Flywheel Project, what kind of like it seems really obvious now that if you increase how much you crush the dart, you'll get a higher FPS out of it. But how did you come to that conclusion, and what made you like start developing higher crush in your cages?
Right. Well, I'd known that the artifact red. I'd never had owned one myself, but I'd read a lot of reviews about it. I've always been someone who follows things extremely closely and obsessively. So I read when I was getting into it, I read every guide on the rapid strike and strife wiring systems, and I read through like 12-page long forum discussions about these and how they would change HVZ and stuff from like 2012. And when the red cage came out and I saw that, I read Torik's blog post on it, and he mentioned that it was harder to push the dart through the cage, and that was compressing the dart and adding more velocity. So at the time, I didn't realize some of the other benefits, some of the other things which were going on. So I tried to mimic that with stock wheels. And that's where the 41.5 millimeter cage spacing comes from, is if you do 41.5 millimeter with stock wheels, you get pretty much 41.5 millimeters. Because I basically asked someone to measure artifact cage, which I knew was stock spacing, and artifact wheels, which I didn't know anything about, and get me those numbers. So I was able to get the dart gap through a artifact red cage, and then design a cage which had that same dart gap but for stock wheels. It was actually one of my friends, Ray, who thought, hey, well, what if I put worker wheels in this? And he shot me with it at HVZ, and I was like, ow, wow. That was a lot faster than I expected. So then I thought, oh, well, this is definitely where I need to be. The performance with stock wheels was never super fantastic because stock wheels flex too much. They have zero concavity. So they're basically, stock wheels are basically a dead end as far as I'm concerned. But that's how it started.
Awesome. And now you've moved on beyond just designing 3D printed parts. You've now designed your own wheels, and there is now a metal version of one of your cages being sold by Hooligan Blaster Co. So, I mean, it kind of makes sense that the next step from 3D printing is metal, especially because that's where like the artifact cage that inspired you came from. So, you want to talk a little bit about that? I guess?
Well, yeah, we definitely. I think the wheels are the more important thing there to discuss. The Riot cage is a great cage, and I have one in my blaster. It's great if you want to use brushless, or if you want running really hot motors and you want really quiet, low vibration accuracy build. The wheels, though, are something I'm much more proud of in terms of what they are and what they will become. Riot wheels really I threw out everything and said, well, I'm printing my own parts, so why should I limit myself to what Worker, Artifact, or anyone else is putting out, or even to the size cages? Because the wheel wells on a lot of other cages are not as big as they can be without interfering with the mounting screw bosses. So for Riot, I really kind of threw everything out and said, I'm going to maximize everything I can within the limitations of a stock shell, and that meant really large wheels, deeper concavity. I think there's definitely still steps we can take further there, and I have some other some new prototypes along those lines that have been posted on a couple of Discord channels at this point. But and Dennis will have a video of those as soon as I get him a pair.
Woo!
But but yeah, it was the logical next step in order to build a whole system, and I was lucky enough at the time, in probably April, I'd been approached by a couple different vendors, Adrian had gotten on board super early, but some of the more established people and Hooligan were saying, "Hey, can we license these from you?" And from the very start, I wanted as much distribution on these as possible. I didn't want anything exclusive. But Hooligan, they were good to me. I know there's been some controversy in that, but in the community, but they came to me. They're like, "Hey, we think you're doing some really cool stuff, and we want to help you take the next step." So they funded Riot, they funded everything for it, and they gave me a very healthy royalty on it. So I didn't have to invest anything in those, and I was able to get those great parts out into the community. At this point, I've started a full-time job, and I have more of my own resources, and I've moved away from them, and I'm getting my own parts sourced myself and machined myself in China, and partnering with retailers to distribute them, just so I can control my own supply chain. I think that's important for me to grow as a company. It also means I'm really the only one responsible for it, so I don't have to consider design restrictions imposed by others.
Yeah. And one of the other like kind of double-edged sword in getting things from China is that at least one of my biggest complaints, and I think a bunch of people who use the Riot Cage's biggest complaint was the like high price for what it was.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
with China,
the Chinese vendors on that are really hard to beat. You can't really beat China on price. It's not going to happen. But I would prefer to get it made in America. The machining tolerances are definitely better in America for metal. For the wheels, for the Delrin, they seem about equal. But it's really more. I don't have a lot of machining contacts in America. The places I tried all quoted me a super high number. But China's, there's an interesting language barrier there, and there's a lot of lead time. So for prototyping, if you want to prototype your own stuff, I would do that in America. I usually do.
just in case anyone listening has plans to prototype their own metal cages.
I mean, honestly, I would really encourage people to start taking next steps in Nerf. I mean, I know I might be encouraging some competition here, but getting something made in China was not that hard. For the prototype Morpheus guide, I spent like $200 to get that and a set of new prototype wheels made and shipped to me out of China to make full runs of later. And you can, that's not that big of an investment in a hobby where people routinely spend that much to build very high-end blasters. So if you have some 3D printed part you're making and selling and people enjoy it, think about taking the next step, honestly.
It's some great advice, and I definitely hope to see more 3D printed parts become not 3D printed. With all the
That being said, I think 3D printing sometimes gets a bad rap in terms of how it's viewed in the hobby. Design for 3D printing is not something I'm great at, but I know enough. I know that it really needs to be designed with the knowledge of how it's being made and how the prints happen and how the layers are oriented and how that force can be applied on the part. Because under certain circumstances, they're really strong. Like within layers, they're really strong. It's all about shear between layers where they're weakest. So a lot of those 3D printed body kits and stuff are really, unless you leave them in a really hot car, they're going to do just fine. And 3D printing really is really cheap for people to get because it's almost always made locally or relatively locally. There's no reason there's no reason not to make it locally. And you can get almost exactly the same performance out of a OFP printed cage and with the same wheels as out of the Riot cage. And the same will be true for any future stuff I release. I'm going to try to release 3D printed versions to keep cost of access down.
So now that you've touched on that, let's talk about that a little bit. What's next for Open Flywheel project? So we kind of every time I think we've peaked in flywheel technology, there's another next step. So we've got like Neo Hellcats coming out right now. Who knows what the next best motor after that is? And we've got like the highest crush you can get on a dart right now. And what seems to be like some of the highest concavity wheels you could get right now. But of course, there is a next step, and I know that you're working on stuff. Do you want to talk about that? You mentioned Project Morpheus earlier, and I'm sure you've got a couple others.
Yeah, sure. I try to be relatively transparent with what I do once I get like working prototypes. I don't want to promise people anything before I can deliver, but you know, I think people should be more open about what they're building. I think it helps build hype, and it's cool to see what the community is coming up with. Yeah, so we'll start with Morpheus, which is the most complete and most ready to go. A prototype one is actually on its way over to Dennis by courier currently, and he'll have a full review, right?
Oh God!
Yeah, you're gonna have to see Van James, but you'll get a full review.
Oh,
no, Morpheus is a milled aluminum guide which fits into a matching 3D printed cage, and it's basically you. If you're not familiar with brassing a cage, it's using a piece of brass inside the cage to guide the dart more closely, and it helps improve accuracy. This is some accuracy is I think a underrated value in Nerf because it's hard to quantify. FPS is easy to quantify, so people can brag about it, and that motivates more research into it. Accuracy is harder to quantify and brag about, and harder to measure. So it's there's not as much effort gets put into it. Sorry, I'm rambling, but Morpheus is hopefully going to help fix that. Brassing a cage is annoying because it's super time consuming. You have to cut the brass by hand. You have to grind it. You have to make sure it's all smooth. Brass is also kind of expensive. It's annoying to work with because it dents easily. And I don't know. My local hardware store doesn't like it, and doesn't have it. And the Amazon listing I had didn't have free shipping, so I never really got into brassing cages. But Morpheus is an aluminum milled guide, which is going to replace that. It comes made from the factory exactly how you want it, and you slide it right into a printed cage, and it fulfills the purpose of a brass guide. It matches up with the fillets on the tongue of the Morpheus guide match up perfectly with little nubs in the printed flywheel cage, and ensures it lines up perfectly every time. I'm really happy about that. My professor from design for manufacturing would be happy about that. Yeah. Oh, beyond Morpheus is Serenity, which is a pretty run-of-the-mill system in general. It's a 42.5 millimeter milled aluminum cage with an integrated dart guide similar to Morpheus. It's named Serenity because I'm a big fan of the TV show Firefly. I expect it to do pretty well just as a alternative to the Artifact Red, which provides slightly more crush while still being compatible with FVJs and usable with 130 motors. Not even the Neo Rhino Super 130s, but regular Michels or Rhinos should be fine in it. It's not that interesting from an innovation perspective. But what I'm really proud of is something I'm calling Eclipse, which is custom wheels, which they fully enclose the dart. I don't know if Dennis can throw up a picture or something. I guess not.
If you give me one, there will be a picture.
Awesome. Then you'll see how it completely encloses the dart. And this is important because it puts the dart under pure hoop stress. The cross-sectional path that the dart is going through is a circle. A tube under hoop stress is much harder to deform than a tube between two plates. And this means more normal force, and this means more energy can be transferred to the dart. The crush distance, the distance from root between the root diameters of the wheels is 8.5 millimeters, but that's also the side of the dart has to compress in as well. So you get a lot more compression. I'm running these on Cronus X right now, and I think they're a little subcritical, and it's shooting around 170 FPS. So I think I have room to improve on it. I'm going to throw some 2S Wolverines in it. And, I mean, Toric's Hycon system is a similar concept, and he had a 9.5 millimeter root diameter and was getting 9.5 millimeter crush distance, also a full circle, and he was getting like 180 FPS. So my goal for this, which is optimistic, is 200 FPS out of a single stage in a stripe. This isn't meant for super stock. This is meant to see exactly how far I can push the boundary, and also because I hate tuning goddamn snap bows, and I don't have a scroll saw. So I need something to shoot at all the NIC players with my. I also don't want to give up semi-auto or full auto. So this is going to be my NIC system. I'm hoping it'll compete with the Caliburn for a new kind of ultra stock field.
So I definitely want to touch on your ideas about ultra stock and that sort of gap bridging between super stock and NIC in a second. But okay, so basically your three big projects: Morpheus, Serenity, and Eclipse.
Eclipse is the full circle one. I may have referred to it as Phoenix earlier, but I'm switching the name because I like Eclipse better.
Okay, cool. So basically, Morpheus came out of the need for more accuracy in flywheel cages, and that a lot of that theory behind Morpheus is from everyone brassing their flywheel cages and that sort of thing. That's sort of almost proven to increase accuracy, but we still have a lot of lack of definitive answers to what exactly makes cages the most accurate. There's been lots of people who have done various videos on it, various personal tests, but we're still waiting on something definitive.
It would be really good. Oh, sorry. You keep going.
I know you can say what you wanted to say.
Well, in terms of accuracy, I think I'm not a believer in canted, but besides that, I think we really need someone to sit down with a proper gun clamp, like for actual guns or something, and clamp a blaster in place. Shoot it at a fixed target with inked tip darts 100 times, and just plot them and put it on an Excel file so we can make little charts showing the spread of them. But I don't have time to do that, so everyone wants to volunteer. I know Dennis has been doing lots of testing now. I'm sure.
Oh boy,
tons of time, right?
Yeah, definitely, lots and lots of time. That's why my upload schedule has been so consistent. So one of the other things I was going to point to is that we're also seeing an increase in accurate darts. So how much of this increase in accuracy are you attributing to your advances in cages with the high concavity wheels and the not brass but Morpheus, and how much of it is really attributed to the increase in accuracy in darts? And are you trying to work with the new darts that are coming out, or are you just kind of doing what is best for all dart types? What would you recommend people use? Well, what darts would you recommend people use in your cages?
I recommend the dart thing is a good point because I should have mentioned this earlier, but for high crush systems, basically a root diameter below crush distance, so wheel to wheel distance at root diameter is below 8.5 millimeters. FPJs and other hard tip darts don't shoot through flywheel cages. I use waffles or AccuFakes for everything these days. and I recommend that everyone else do the same. There's really no reason not to. They're cheap, they're durable, and they're super accurate. Um, you can always get more accurate though, and there's definitely an advantage to a well-built cage system. And mine is by no means not the only one. I know that the DRS system is extremely precise and still has the best accuracy on the market. Um, I'm not sure I believe in canted, but I do know that it makes sense to me that aluminum cages would be more accurate. There's less vibration. There's less vibration means more, less movement around in the cage and more consistency. The Morpheus guides really impressed me just shooting around my house. I was able to get just from this is not a scientific test, but mag dumping from one end of my house to the other, I was able to hit a single 12 by 12 window frame, or actually it was 11 by 13 window pane. Whereas with Riot, the mag dump probably covered a maybe 2 foot by 2 foot area. This is from about 45 feet away. I think there's definitely an increase there, and it's going to be a pretty cheap system no matter what. Just because most of it's printed, and the milled pieces should be pretty, they are pretty cheap to manufacture. So the whole system can be like $25, and for better accuracy, than anything probably, other than a Dr. Snicker's cage, just because his machining tolerances are so tight. But I don't do a lot of testing on my own first party testing, partly because I don't have time, partly because I don't. I'd rather have people independently do my testing. So I'm hoping Dennis is going to do all my work for me in terms of explaining how accurate this is.
Oh boy.
Right?
So another thing you mentioned is that FVJs don't work in your highest crush cage, which I'm going to guess was part of the inspiration for Serenity, the 42.5 millimeter cage, along with the fact that one of the greatest things about Open Flywheel Project, along with part of the fact that we have so many aftermarket parts now, is that you could literally pick whatever FPS you want your blaster to hit, and there is guaranteed a setup for it. And I think a lot of that is attributed to the fact that Open Flywheel Project supplies cages in every crush distance, every half a millimeter, which doesn't sound like a lot, but there's actually like a 10 FPS increase at every increase in crush or something like that.
Yeah, so 43.5 millimeter will get you. I encourage everyone to look at Foam Blast's data set for this, which is really the most complete, and that's where I get all my numbers from. But from 43.5 millimeters, you get, I think they got like 30 FPS worth. With 41.5, you get about 160 FPS. So you gain like 5 FPS every half millimeter. It's not nothing. And you can change wheels, of course, to tune beyond that.
Yep. So Serenity came out of the need for having a cage that can shoot FVJs and similar harder tip darts, but also having sort of like a midpoint between stock crush cages and the highest crush cages, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've had that option on the printed ones for a long time now. But Serenity, I don't use FDJs. I don't particularly like them, and my group doesn't. We don't officially ban them, but no one uses them. But I get there's a lot of love for FDJs in the community, and I guess you gotta do what the community wants. I think there's also something to be said for velocity caps and their impact on the market. Most places cap at 150. A few are capping at 160 now. There's still a lot of places which cap at 130 or 140, and especially stuff like HVZ. And Serenity is designed to be able to play safely in those caps, or play safely in a 140 cap without having to worry about stuff. Whereas Riot ended up with from your average with an average of 155 FPS with waffle tips. All my numbers I quote with waffle tips. I know a lot of people, including the Foam Blast data set, use elites, but I always quote my numbers in waffles. All my estimations are for waffles because that's what I actually play with in a game. Yeah, so Riot ended up at 155, just above most of the caps, and some of them, raised it to accommodate the new, standard cage flywheel capabilities. A lot didn't. So Serenity is going after those people with more limited velocity caps and saying, here, well, this is still improved performance over Artifact Red. It lets you get a couple more FPS. It's going to be more consistent because it has a dark guide, stuff like that.
Awesome. So now let's go back to something you touched on earlier, which is your idea of ultra stock, the sort of in between of super stock and NIC. Aside from the FPS difference in the two, one of the biggest differences is that one of them uses completely stock darts, full length darts, and the other one uses homemade darts. So your idea for ultra stock is basically to bridge that FPS cap. Bring up FPS caps at games to like 200-ish, something like that, and keep using stock darts? Or what exactly are your like visions for this ultra stock that you talked about?
It's going to have to change for different communities, and I'm by no means the first person to suggest ultra stock. There's been talk of that as a super high end ultra stock, super high end super stock builds for as long as there have been super high end super stock builds, but I'd really like to see something like a 250 or even a 300 cap, no limits game, and just be able to have flywheel tech, which is competitive there. I think, you were at that war at CTNO. I ran my regular super stock rapid strike, which had a 41.5 millimeter cage with worker wheels, and it was shooting waffles at 150 FPS. And we were playing, what were you running at that war? A 4B or a pump?
I switched off a couple times, but for the most of it, I used Nick Marvin, who was here on the show last week, if you want to check out that episode. His homemade double rainbow. So that went pretty well, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, I definitely got tagged a lot. But I also made plenty of tags, and I had a ton of fun playing with super stock against NIC class stuff. Like, that was one of the most fun wars I've had, just because it meant there was an interesting balance and dynamic between high rate of fire and longer range stuff. And that was a really cool combination. And I hope whatever ultra stock ends up with leaves room for almost a sniper class, something which can hit you accurately from 100, 150 feet away, because that was really cool to play with and play against. Personally, I think Caliburn is a huge step in that direction. It uses mags, and bringing mags into the NIC community is a big deal. I'm hoping that the Eclipse system can kind of piggyback on that newfound hype and accessibility to NIC levels with among superstock players, because I think that's been another issue. For the most part, NIC has been pretty limited to old school veterans who've been around for a while, and it's been relatively inaccessible for new players just because you need to shell out significant cash to get an NIC primary, or you need to invest in slugs or short darts, and that's off-putting to some people, where Superstock has a much more natural influx of new players among kids who see mods on YouTube, and eventually they say, hey, maybe I should try that myself, and next thing you know, they're actually contributing. And hopefully stuff like the Caliburn, which is really improving access to a Superstock friendly way to play NIC with mags, and Eclipse can help continue that influx into high velocity games.
Yeah, me and Nick talked about that a bit last time, and Caliburn bridging the gap. And Nick was a really big fan of Caliburn because of that bridge and because it made, what do you call it, NIC style wars a lot more accessible to people who don't want to build homemades or don't have the ability to, don't have the money to, etc. And I like that you're also pushing in that same direction, but with Flywheel tech. It's obviously a lot easier based on how much springers have progressed over the years compared to flywheels to get the springers to 200 FPS. But if anyone can do it, it's probably you.
There's people. Turret's Hycon system will hit 200 FPS, if probably with minor tweaks to wheel geometry, no problem. Stuff like the FDL is doing 170 now, though I don't know if that's with elites or waffles. I don't think I'm not the only one pushing in this direction, and certainly stuff like going back a long time. Eli's, I think it was called Hex, it was like a 3-stage brushless Raven. There have been people pushing pushing for this level of stuff in a while. I'm trying to get it downsized to the point where it just fits in a strife, and it's no harder than building any other strife.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the biggest benefits to Open Flywheel Project as opposed to, let's say, Caliburn even, or anyone else that's been reaching, getting close to or reaching that 200 FPS mark with flywheels.
Yeah, so I will say, that's a goal. That's not. There's nothing out right now which is doing that. There's some, there's stuff in the works which should do that. I don't want to get ahead of ourselves too much, but
of course,
yeah. So Nick, or sorry, Dennis.
Yeah, go ahead.
Dennis, would you consider yourself a flywheel person or a springer person at all? So should I see if I should try to convert you, or?
I don't know. I definitely have a love for both, depending on gameplay, depending on like what I'm doing. For NIC stuff, like the couple NIC wars I've been to, I've really enjoyed using Nick's Double Rainbow and rainbows in general. There's just something about the way it feels and the way it works that's just really appealing to me. For HVZ type stuff, I'll use a flywheel or anytime it's not raining, and that's usually my primary, unless I accidentally only have flywheelers that are outside of whatever FPS cap I'm playing at. But I definitely switch back and forth plenty. If you saw my Artemis build, it was an attempt at having the best of both springers and flywheelers, which worked relatively well, except for the weird bulk and weird asymmetry. But it was still a lot of fun to be able to have both in one build. And I think that Artemis is pretty descriptive of my feelings towards it too, is that I really like both and really like using both for various things. But yeah, you've definitely worked towards converting me to flywheels. I used the one of my tests of the Riot Cage was I brought it to Superstock War, admittedly a relatively small one, and I think everyone there was using flywheels, and almost everyone had one of your cages in their blasters too. But the Riot Cage was definitely one of the best performers, and it was definitely a lot of fun to use. But one of the reasons that I've started really liking NIC recently is Nick mentioned on last week's podcast how Superstock is starting to feel like electronic paintball in a way, and that can be taken as a good thing or a bad thing depending on how you like to play. But having a Superstock War and NIC War are two very different games, especially in terms of how you as a player approach the battlefield, where you have significantly more rounds ready to deploy in a strife than you do a homemade blaster, and you have to be a little bit closer in Superstock, but you have more shots, and the dodging is a little bit different and all that sort of thing. So I've really started to like NIC because it's both slower and faster gameplay in a way. It's slower in that you take more time to like line up shots and stuff, but it's faster in the sense that like you're. I feel like we move a little bit more in NIC in terms of like trying to get to the best spot to hit the next person. Whereas in Super Stock, there was definitely a lot of like hiding behind trees and like just spamming shots a little bit, which you don't really do in NIC quite as much because of your limited ammo capacity. But of course, I'm sure there's people in both games that play the opposite way of that.
No, I think those are great insights, and I think that they match what I see generally. I've probably played more Super Stock than you, but less NIC at this point. I've only played a couple NIC wars, but when the most fun I have is when I run a Super Stock Blaster or a Super Stock style Flywheel mag-fed build at NIC, because then you get that great combination of advantages and disadvantages, and anyone running wheels is, they have to run, they have to sprint from one piece of cover to the next, they have to charge, they have to rush hard, they have to retreat, they have to coordinate, do suppressing fire, and have other people from long range. I think having a mix of both types just adds so much dynamics to the game, because otherwise it does get stale when you have, 4 guys on one side with strikes and 4 guys on the other side with rapid strikes. The match is not, super. I mean, it can be very fun and very interesting, and I still really enjoy that style of play. But when all the players' blaster capabilities are similar to each other, it's just more uniform. It's less diverse, and I think the same thing can be a problem at NIC levels too, where everyone has pump hoppered springers. To bring the two together,
yeah, I definitely agree with you.
Those are the best. Bringing the two together. Maybe a 250 FPS.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I'm really excited for more and more wars to slowly start integrating the two and letting them coexist, and having wars with a mix. And I think that one of the great things about the different classes of blaster is that they kind of automatically put themselves into various roles, in the sense that like right now flywheelers are for the most part capped at like 170 just based on what they can do. So you have the highest rate of fire in the lowest FPS blaster. You get up to slightly higher rate of fire with the Caliburn, and it's mag fed, so you get to spam a little bit more and it gets a little bit more FPS, but it's still you still get less darts per second, but also less FPS than you would an NIC blaster, which you only have 8 shots in your hopper at any time, maybe like 9 or 10 depending on how big your hopper is, but you're getting like the highest FPS on the field. You also have like the highest accuracy on the field, so it kind of automatically all these blasters kind of automatically put themselves into these categories, and of course that dynamic will shift as like maybe someone makes something slightly better than the Caliburn that's similar, and as you and Torek and other people work on getting flywheel blasters to higher and higher FPS. So like all of those dynamics will shift over time, but they're at I think this might be one of like the best time to start the integration of NIC and Super Stock into a mixed game, because all the different blasters are already limited in like an interesting like blaster class way, that right now I think is probably one of the best times to start integrating these wars, and I really hope more and more people start doing it.
I really agree with that sentiment. I'll say even further that it's not just the way it splits the gameplay. It changes everything, because if you're playing Super Stock, there's a fairly objective, I'm not going to say it's perfect, but there's a fairly objective argument that an overhauled rapid strike or strife is the best blaster to run from a purely competitive standpoint. You know, it can max the field in rate of fire and range and accuracy and FPS. And you know, if you prefer semi-auto, the Strife ticks all of those boxes as well. Um, yeah, a lot of people have personal preferences, and I'm not going to make anyone happy with that statement. I get that, but when you start allowing a lot more range of blasters into the game, there's an actual choice where, you know, objectively, you know, it's not clear which is the best blaster. They all have legitimate roles to play. When we play our games, we're always balancing. Oh, we'll have to split up the flywheelers because they're so much better than the springers. When you have a mixed bag of all capable stuff like that, it makes that not as important.
Yeah, absolutely. It kind of sucks that New York is one of the areas where we have the most amount of people who, as far as I've seen throughout various Nerf communities, who are the most like willing to put these two together from what I've seen. But at the same time, our local wars are all relatively small. All the ones I've been to have had like I want to say like 10 to 15 people max at any time. Um, which kind of sucks because while you do get to play with both those types, they're still relatively small wars. Whereas wars like the SCNC, 307 Nerf out in Utah, I
Yeah,
want to say it's
they're in
Utah
Utah,
or
and some of them
Wyoming.
are in Wyoming.
Yeah, and those like bigger places are still using super stock and have those FPS caps that you don't like
That's
on their
changing though.
blasters.
I know 307 has started to raise their caps. I think they cap at 165 now. Um, in New York, what we did for a long while, we've been letting these numbers creep up. But for a while, we had everything. Um, mag fed was capped at 150, and like uh, anything which was single shot could go up to 200. We've let both of those numbers slide, and we're starting to allow RSCBs and hoppers and stuff in as well. But we're still pretty super stock in that we let everything has to be full length unmodified darts. So that limits how high you can go and still get decent accuracy. But I think it's a good compromise for people
Yeah,
looking to experiment with it because it still keeps everything relatively safe. New York, I'll agree. I mean, this is just for uh, not relevant to everyone, but we have a marketing problem because there's so many people that are in New York which should be interested in this. And like Long Island pulls like 25 people for their wars every month, and almost none of them come out to the city for ours. I've gone out there a couple times. They're pretty cool guys, but they're kind of anti-progress. They banned the Nemesis because it was OP. So
yeah. So while we've been talking about the integration of everything from like 150 FPS flywheelers to 200 plus FPS homemades, a lot of the other conversation has been, at least from what I've seen, comparing stupidly high rate of fire rival stuff like the Nemesis and the Hurricane, which is going to end up being capped at like it's only effective at like 50 feet at max, and it ends up being capped out at like 130 FPS really, just because of how the balls
yep.
work. Versus like the 150 to 170 flywheelers, like that's been everyone else's
Well,
conversation. But I think that ours is a lot more interesting. And maybe like even Rival has a place in this ultra stock
yeah.
setting.
I will
Um,
say I have a hopper expanded Nemesis, which held 400 rounds, and it's it's fun, but it's not great. I'll, especially for any super stock, I'll take darts all day, every day. For HVZ, maybe some indoor games, I'll run the Nemesis. But for everything else, the time to target advantage, the accuracy, the range is all just such a huge benefit of darts in a well set up, highly tuned flywheel system. Uh, going after running my rapid strike for a couple rounds, going back to the Nemesis, I feel like so bulky and slow, and I can't reach out and tag people. It just doesn't feel good after running a good wheel system.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that. My Nemesis, I haven't gotten to use it a whole lot because I got it very recently, as have most people who did not order theirs from Canada. Um, but it's definitely a fun blaster, but it doesn't feel like a practical blaster the way that a Strife Rapid Strike or even a Homemade or something like that feels.
Well, for
And I think
HBZ, I think it's really practical and really good because you don't have to tag the zombies till they're within like 20 feet of you. So
that's very true.
It's not like they're going to shoot back really, unless you have like sock zombies or some other weird mutation. But for super stock, where the players are shooting back at you, well, I also think super stock is more interesting.
Rival just doesn't feel like it. Yeah, Rival just doesn't feel like it competes that well in super stock. Okay, so we've talked a lot about that stuff, about like local wars and wars in general. Let's talk a little bit more about the online community and that sort of thing. So you are not the only aftermarket maker right now.
No.
Do you have another favorite aftermarket company that is not your
own?
Yeah.
Well, I don't like to pick favorites, especially because I have a lot of those aftermarket companies who are licensing designs for me to sell.
Of course.
But I will say that Adrian Kelly, who runs Kelly Industries, has been a close friend of mine for a long time, even before he started his store. And we work really well together. I think we balance out very well because he's really strong electrically. I can understand a little bit of electrical stuff, and he's also really strong mechanically and can understand it and can do a lot of great stuff there as well. So he's a great person to talk to about this stuff. And yeah, we're going to be stay tuned for more stuff about Kelly and OFP because we work well together. That's all I'm going to say for now. Like, he's a great guy.
I'm excited.
And you should check out his store. But there are lots of great stores. Out of Darts has been great to me. I met him at a bar in Indoor. So I remember watching his videos and saying, wow, this guy is so good at engineering. Something like that. I want to make awesome Nerf stuff. And then like 5 months later, I'm like, hang on, why don't I try to do that? So that was awesome to not quite a meet your heroes moment, but it was pretty cool. He's a fun guy.
So on the topic of added darts, we touched on Rival a little bit. Are you working on anything with him? Maybe Rival related? I actually don't know the inside scoop on this. So if there is one,
everything else we say this in the UNC chat. But yeah, I'm not working with him on anything Rival. I've experimented with some higher crush cages in Chaos and found that they didn't really get you any increased FPS wise. I think with adding just crush, there's a lot of diminishing returns. And I think Rival is so deep into that at this point that changing the crush isn't really going to help you. I think you really need, if you told me I had to max a Flywheel Rival system, I'd probably want some custom wheels with a perfectly circular pass through for the ball, and try to do something like that. But even then, the physical limitations of the ball with the really high, with a high cross sectional area and low mass means it's not going to be stable over 150 probably. I built a 2-stage Zeus at one point. It shot like probably 155 or 160, but balls were just everywhere.
Yeah, I could definitely see that happening. So similar question. Do you watch any Nerf YouTubers? And if you do, who's your favorite? Who inspires you? And who do you feel contributes to the hobby the most?
Man, all right, that's a tough question. To be honest, I don't watch a lot of Nerf YouTube. I don't. I just in general don't really like consuming video content because it eats up data, and I can't like go at my own rate. Like when I can't just it's hard to skim over boring stuff, etc. But I do watch some YouTubers. Um, I really like MTB and Out of Darts. I think they, especially like the MTB guys, have a really good chemistry together, and they're really funny to watch. Their videos are always super entertaining. Just like the ribbing and personal interactions and jokes that they have between each other are really entertaining. They also have a lot of good information. I like Out of Darts. His video style is very well done, and also he has a lot of really cool, innovative builds. He's done a lot of advancement in the hobby. He did some really innovative, unique blaster designs, and that's awesome. The Hurricane is a totally new and unique way to beat darts, and it's awesome. So, and he pioneered that, so that's a really cool innovation.
Awesome. Definitely agree with
But
you on those two picks.
Dennis, I should say Dennis also does some great testing.
Oh, thank you.
You should subscribe to Dennis. His videos aren't boring. The Flywheel one is really detailed and really good.
That's what I aim for. All right, so do you have any like favorite modders, moving away from YouTubers, just in general, people whose work you like to see? I know for Nick, when we talked about it last week, he had a lot of like a lot of people who worked on like shell work and cosmetic stuff. I know that you don't really do a lot of cosmetic work on your own blasters, so maybe you have some other more practical Nerf modders that you enjoy their work, or what do you like in the community?
Well, I have to say I really like Turek Makto's stuff on Flywheelers. He's done a huge amount for Flywheelers in terms of understanding crush, understanding, just well-designed, well-tuned systems as a whole. He's put a lot of thought into that, and his blog is really well worth reading through just to see some of the history of the development of stuff. Ryan from MTB has done some awesome simulations and released some awesome code. His white paper for supercritical flywheel systems should be mandatory reading material for anyone who wants to build a flywheel system. It's just anyone who wants to have a modified strife or rapid strike should read his paper on supercriticality. It's only like 12 pages or something. It's super well explained. The math and physics are all solid. He made, at the time, there's something like, there's no reason anyone will ever need anything other than 130 motors, which, we've moved past. But the general principles are foundational to Nerf, to flywheels. And, if I hadn't read that, I wouldn't have done anything I've done. So, that was an influential paper.
That's really cool. All right. So, if you listened to last week's podcast, which I hope you did.
Shit, sorry. I didn't realize this could be on the test.
Oh my God.
I'm the worst guest ever, Dennis. You're going to have to do this segment.
Absolutely. All right, I was going to ask if you have anything in response to Nick Marvin, but I guess the answer is no.
If you give me a summary of what he said, I'll have a response for you.
Oh, that's a lot. Okay, never mind. We're just going to skip that.
Sorry, Dennis. Was this on a cheat sheet you gave me earlier?
No. I mean, actually, yes. All right,
I'm sorry.
So, last two questions kind of intertwined.
Sorry, what was that you said?
Okay, so these last two questions are kind of intertwined. So, what are you excited for in the future of Nerf as a whole, and then what's in the future for Open Flywheel project?
All right. So
And if they're the same answer, that's totally fine too. If you're only excited for your own stuff.
no, I think Nerf is going to take some pretty big steps forward. I think hobby level Nerf is just we are we are just starting to come of age. We are just starting to reach out and taste what we can be. It's like a full fledged hobby with our own supplies. Um, in 10 years, no one should be buying a Hasbro blaster to play hobby Nerf. Prophecy and Seta are the very first steps in something in really changing this hobby. And I think beyond that level, stuff like FDL has been doing it at an expensive and high end level for a while. But the level of aftermarket Nerf has grown hugely in leaps and bounds in the last 2 years, and that's the most exciting thing. Is what we as a community can do with our own money, with our own ideas, and with our own businesses. And I, hope I can be a part of that continued acceleration of easy access to good stuff. OFP is in an interesting spot right now because I just started full-time work and I'm working pretty long hours. So now I have money from my actual real job to pay for prototyping and I bought my own 3D printer, and I don't have any time to do anything really these days. So I'm slower on the testing and stuff. I've been doing more stuff like Morpheus, where it's manufactured in China. I send them CAD. They send me a prototype a couple weeks later. But that being said, I've just been running the printer overnight, trying to get prototypes out. I do have a nice little commute that I can spend brainstorming better ways to shoot darts, and that's what I do because Nerf is my escape. Designing the stuff. This wasn't really part of the question, but I'm going to say it because it's important to me. Designing your own stuff is the most wonderful thing about Nerf. In almost no other hobby can you just design your own parts from scratch in CAD, put them on a printer, have them come out, and have your blaster be unique and different and perform better. To actually improve your own stuff is by far the most interesting and exciting thing about this hobby. Is that people of all levels can get into this hobby, and even if you're just putting together your own strip, even if you're just wiring up, two Michel motors into a stock cage, that's more work to create your primary than a lot of people do in other hobbies. And a lot of things, for a lot of people, a hobby is something they do and enjoy, that they spend money on, and they do. But we spend money on things that we create, and I think that's the most magical thing about this hobby.
That was really awesome. All right, that was it for my questions. If you have anything left you want to say to the audience, feel free to do so. Otherwise, we're just going to wrap up this podcast.
No, thanks definitely for taking the time to listen. If you have questions for me on, anything related to my designs or anything, definitely feel free to reach out to me at my Facebook page, openflywheelproject.com. I'll respond when I get the chance, which is going to be almost immediately during lunchtime or before and after work. And yeah,
awesome.
Thanks, Dennis. Thank you for having me on. It's an honor, and I hope we can,
of course,
come back and do some other chats that you were talking about. I think it'll be really cool.
I have lots and lots of plans for more of these episodes, and I hope to have you on again. Thanks so much for coming out and having this conversation and talking to me and everyone else. Yeah. So that's it for this episode of the DVTests podcast. Join us next week as one of two things will happen. We're either going to have Australians next week or a bunch of DIY people. We'll see. Or maybe something completely different if either of those or both of those don't work out. So stay tuned. It'll be a surprise, basically. Yeah, thank you everyone for watching. All of Phil's information and contact stuff will be in the description of the video / SoundCloud clip. And yeah, thank you for listening.
Go.